Hi, and welcome to a new edition of Here Now the News. I'm Jerry Barmash. Today, I guess if we had to pick a topic or a theme, it would be comedy. We're going to talk, not really doing stand up, but we're going to talk about some comedy with a woman who has gotten some popularity nationwide in the last couple of months. And we're going to talk about that with Ariel Elias. Thank you for being with me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very excited to meet you. Now, I didn't know about you, and I'm sure a lot of people were in that same boat until there was this viral video. You posted it, I'm sure, and
Yeah.
you helped it go get out there. But it was a bit scary. It was a heckler that well you'll explain, but I think a heckler had what thrown a beer can at you, right?
Yeah, it was if we're being really technical and accurate, it was a high noon, but I until they sponsor me, I'm gonna call it a beer. So yes, I was at a comedy show. I feel like everybody's kind of seen the video at this point. But I was at a comedy show, I was doing stand-up and I had a little heckler situation and the heckler's husband on their way out threw very hard a beer at me. It missed me, and then I picked it up and I drank it.
Yeah, you picked it up, you drank it right there, and it could have. I mean, it was close. It was close to hitting you, and I don't know how it would have gone from there if if this could have were charges pressed by the way
By the club, yeah.
by the club. Okay,
hmm
did they question you about it or what like what to do?
Um, yeah, I mean, I was asked if I wanted to press charges, and when I found out sort of the logistics of what would go into it, if I did press charges, I felt like it was a better decision to not. Not because I don't think that that guy should face consequences, but because it would require a lot from me. It would require going back to that town, which is about a 2.5 hour drive, basically to go back to file the charges, to go back for any subsequent like hearing or whatever. And it just felt like I this has already been a huge part of my life. I don't need to make it a bigger part.
And that was in, I believe, South Jersey, right?
hmm
What and by the way, for this one person, this bad apple, if you will, and there's always hecklers and and comics work through it throughout their career.
Sure.
But you immediately got the support of everyone. Anyone you didn't, you immediately got the support of everyone, and whether they were booing him or they were cheering you, and the way you handled it was really professional.
Thanks. I mean, I think we sort of live in a time where you kind of only like everybody has an amplified voice because of the internet. And it's easy based on just like looking at like politics in our country. It feels like everybody is constantly mad at each other and wants to be at each other's throats. And I think this situation showed that that's actually the exception, right? Like one person was angry enough to throw something at me and everybody else, whether they were enjoying me or not, felt like that had crossed a line. And I think like that is kind of a heartwarming. I know like my standards are super low now where I'm like, isn't that so beautiful? Everybody thought it was bad that this guy threw something at me. But it is a reminder that for the most part, we do recognize each other's humanity. It's the exception to not, even though sometimes it can feel like the opposite.
Usually, not always, but usually, comedy clubs have been a safe haven. There are exceptions, and obviously, since the Academy Awards last year, that was kind of a concern after what happened with Chris Rock and Will Smith. But I'm sure this is a first for you to this extent, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a first for me. I think when you say comedy clubs have been a safe haven, I think you then have to ask like for who, because it's usually not like women and people of color who are performing there who feel super safe in comedy clubs historically. Um, and we're also less likely to get booked a lot of times on the road. If you look at a lot of places, a lot of comedy clubs, and I'm talking like outside of major cities, which is
Mm.
where most comedy clubs are, If you look at those lineups, it's mostly white men. So
Mm.
I think like, yeah, comedy clubs have, we like to think like it's the safe place where you can say anything. Um, but the truth is that is usually only extended to a certain amount of people.
And did you, since then, did you change any way that you either performed or where you performed, how you, what were you like watching what you were saying after that, or were you just doing your own thing?
You know, it's funny, like the next day after that show, I was doing a show in the city, in New York City at Gotham, and one of the waitresses was like, "Hey, I'm so sorry that that couple in the front row is like really chatty." And I was like, "Oh, I don't care now if somebody's chatty. Like, that's not, everything's changed. If they're not throwing anything at me, they're fine." Um, I think I definitely have a little bit of a trauma response now with crowds where I am a little bit slower to go after somebody who is maybe like talking or who is talking back. You know, I
Hmm.
think there is a part of me that's like, I wish this wasn't the case, and I don't like that this is happening right now, but I do like definitely have a little bit of fear. Um, and I'm kind of just hoping that it fades on its own.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I have to like wait until I get health insurance and get therapy.
Does it change I don't know what type of comedy. I think it's more like observational, right? And about your own life
Yeah, it's
experiences.
mostly that. I don't really talk about politics that
So you
much.
you don't get into things where people could really, be angry. I mean, I guess it
I
was
mean,
the
apparently I do, but
alcohol, I'm assuming that causes that. But yeah, I don't know what this person's problem was. Did you like the fact that this brought you to another level? I mean, that you forget about here, but here you are on Jimmy Kimmel, and you're interviewed many other places because of this, what's for all intents and purposes, other than the positive response that you had, it was a negative.
well, yeah, I mean, if I'm gonna get the trauma from it, it's nice to at least have the recognition too, right? eh, you know, it's like I've been trying to build a career for, I've been at this for 11 years, so I've been trying to build a career for a while. And for a long time it was, I will take any gig, I will perform anywhere. Um, and it's nice to basically have done the worst gig of my life and know that that was the last time that I've had to be in the position where I have said, I will take any gig, I will perform anywhere. And now I can be a little bit more choosy because of it. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, and as I said, you've gotten exposure from this, which is a good thing, that you were able to turn this into something that you can um, give people an opportunity to see you for more than just somebody throwing something at you. That you're a real comedian there. There's a talent there.
Yeah, it's kind of nice. I try not to read comments ever on anything that I post, but it has been nice occasionally to see something of somebody will be like, "Oh, I came to your Instagram because, or I started following you because of the beer can, but I'm really glad to see that like I love your jokes and I love your stand up." And I think that was what was so great about Kimmel, was going on Kimmel and performing stand up. It felt like, okay, I've been introduced to the world in this way that I was not planning on and is not ideal. But let me show that I actually have the chops to back it up. Like, let me show that I've been at this for a while and that me drinking the beer can was not just a fluke. It's because I've done this thousands of times and, you know, have learned how to like control myself on stage.
Yeah, I mean, it was good that it was not this one-off thing. Hopefully, I mean that this is the takes you to the next level. Like, you can use this to go forward, and that you didn't do a 6-minute set about the what happened. You were
Right.
talking about what you would normally be discussing. You said 11 years, so more than 10 years you've been performing,
Mm-hmm.
waiting for that the big break, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I mean the first 5 or 6 years I wasn't waiting for a break. I knew I was pretty bad at it still and shouldn't be. Stand up's such a weird art form because you do have to get better at it in public in front of people. So it's not as if you can just like stay at home and practice in the mirror for 4 years and then go out there and be seasoned and ready to be seen. So the first several years, I was not waiting for a big break. I was just trying to figure out how to be better. Um, but we live in a time now where there's not, for the most part, there's not one thing that sort of like makes you anymore in the way that there used to be. So it feels weird and exciting and scary to have something that I'm the exception now of like I did have one thing that like sort of lifted me and broke through the noise. So just weird.
Yeah, no, no, it's great. I love your tiny little bio that you have on Twitter is, I believe, 4 words. Kentucky, uh, Kentucky Jew plus time equals comedy. Is that what it
Yeah.
says? Can explain what that means a little bit.
Well, it is a play on the tragedy plus time equals comedy. So my personal tragedy is that I'm a Kentucky Jew, which obviously is like satire. I'm very like grateful for who I am and how I grew up. But it's it. I think anyone who grows up an outsider. Oops, sorry, my dog just kicked the laptop. Anyone who grows up feeling like they're on the outside of the majority, you become a little bit more like observational and you develop a bit of a thicker skin. And I mean, I think the biggest thing was I grew up a lot of times explaining myself to people and answering questions. And stand up in many ways is just answering questions without having the question be asked first.
Did you have it right in your Twitter profile? So do you use it in your experiences as a comic that you do, right? As far
Mm-hmm.
as your upbringing and this, there must be a plethora of jokes there. The fact that you're Jewish from Kentucky, I'm Jewish from New York, so it's a different experience. I'm
Yeah.
certainly interested to hear about that.
Yeah, well, like I'm like very proud of being Jewish and I'm very proud of being from Kentucky. I think my perspective is not coming from like I'm not trying to put Kentucky down. Um I think people are fascinated by it because usually when I meet people, especially in New York, they've never met anybody from Kentucky, period, because it's not a small state, but population wise it is small. And then to meet a Kentucky Jew just feels like so foreign to them. Even though, I grew up with like I went to synagogue. Like we had two synagogues in my town. We had like that like that classic Jewish joke of like no matter how many Jews live there, like you have to have the synagogue you go to and the synagogue you would never go to. Um, but I grew up in like a very tight knit community, so it was. I think it became such a big part of my identity being Jewish when I lived in Kentucky, because it felt it felt very defining because it was the exception. Um, so living in New York, obviously, like being Jewish is not the exception, but being from Kentucky sure is. So I don't know. I think both parts of that like colored my experience a lot. Like I think for in Kentucky, I was the only Jew for a lot of my friends. I was the only Jewish person that they knew, and my family like really embraced all of my friends, and we would my parents wanted to share like our culture with everybody. So it would be like I remember going ice skating with a bunch of my friends one year and we got hungry afterwards and I called my mom and she was like, I'm making latkes, bring them all over. And so it was just like 10 Kentucky kids, like a bunch of pickup trucks pulling up to my parents' house and like eating a bunch of latkes.
On the other side of this, was there, I'm thinking if there's not a lot of Jews in an area, there would be the potential, excuse me, the potential for hate, and anti-Semitism. Did you face that? People face that where there are a lot of Jews, so I would wonder if you faced it there.
Not as much as I've experienced it in New York
Hmm.
or in New Jersey. I think I think what I experienced was a lot of ignorance, but usually what came along with that ignorance was curiosity, not hate. The joke that I sort of tell is like, in order to hate Jews, you have to know what one is. So people in Kentucky like don't really hate Jews that much. Um, like I didn't. This is like, I guess it's a little embarrassing. I remember in high school, one of my friends asked me at school one day. She said, "What's the K word?" And I was like, "What?" And she was like, "I was watching Law and Order and they mentioned the K word for Jewish people. What is that?" And I had no idea. And I was like 17 at this point. I had to like go home and ask my mom because I was like, nobody's ever called me that because nobody knows to call me that. Um,
Because
so
they hadn't seen that many. So people, even if there was that hatred, it wasn't given to people because they didn't know really that many Jews growing up.
right. I mean, I say it in my set of the worst. Some of the worst things that people said was that I was going to hell, but that came from a place of love, which I know sounds confusing, but it was my friends who were very Christian who were like genuinely concerned for my soul. It wasn't like, oh, you control the media. Like I never
Right,
understood the
right.
stereotypes when I was growing up because I was like, Jews aren't. It's not a bunch of like Hollywood types. It's just professors. Those were all the Jews that I knew. They were all professors at UK or EKU.
So these are people that wanted to change you, wanted to
Right.
make you more in their mold, in their image, if you will.
Sure. Yeah.
Of course, then you have to tell them who Jesus was, but we don't have to get into that.
Yes.
That's a whole different story. By the way, I was in high school. I was called that word, and I didn't know what it was. I knew
Yeah.
by the tone it wasn't nice. It was not
Right.
said to me like, "Hey, how's it going?" It wasn't a friendly thing. We were all going to get together after school. So I did the same thing. I went home and asked my parents, "What is that word?" Because I had never heard it. It wasn't, we didn't talk about it in the house. There was more Yiddish being brought up. Did they do Yiddish? Did your family ever speak Yiddish? No?
My grandparents. I know
Yeah.
my grandmother spoke Yiddish, and then my dad's side is Sephardic. So I know my dad's grandmother spoke Ladino, and I think my grandfather did too, but he died before I was born.
What's
Um,
Ladino?
Ladino is it's like a combination of Spanish and Hebrew, so it's the Sephardic.
Oh, okay.
Um, it's the Sephardic version of Yiddish,
Oh,
basically.
okay.
It's written like Hebrew. It sounds like Spanish.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So that's Sephardic. So that's from that portion of the world, I guess.
Hmm.
So you were born in Kentucky?
I was born in San Francisco, and then when I was like 3 or 4 weeks old, my family moved to Kentucky.
So that was a work related?
Yeah, my dad's an English professor,
Oh,
and
okay.
he got a job at EKU, at Eastern Kentucky University.
Ah, see, it all comes together now. San Francisco, professor in college. Okay, see, that
Hmm.
makes sense. What, by the way, there was a documentary several years ago about the Jewish experience in the South. I don't know if you ever heard of it, Shalom
No.
Y'all, and
Ah,
it's all about the turn of the last century, and there were so many synagogues, and it's I don't know where it is, but it's out there somewhere, I guess.
okay. I remember when I was a kid, there was the show called State of Grace. Did you ever see that?
No, but it sounds familiar. Where do I know that from? It sounds
It
familiar.
was I believe it was on ABC Family. It was about a family. I think I want to say they were from Chicago, a Jewish family who moves to somewhere in the South, and the Jewish girl befriends like the most Southern blonde girl, and I really identified with that show.
Identified with that. The movie, last one on this topic, Driving Miss Daisy,
Hmm.
Jewish woman from Atlanta, And
Mm-hmm.
in there, she goes to synagogue, and it's the temple. And I'm like, that can't be. That has to be just like a movie thing that they just made it the temple. Like they couldn't secure the rights. I asked my sister-in-law who lives in Atlanta, and she said, no, that's the name of it. In fact, when we were visiting in Atlanta, I looked at the phone book, and it says the Temple, Peachtree, whatever street or something. And of course, we went there, and I took a picture outside of it, and it just says the Temple, not
Mm-hmm.
congregation, whatever. It's just the Temple. These are anecdotes that'll make anybody excited. No, so your comedy is about you, about growing up, about
Mm-hmm.
family.
Sure, yeah, it's about that. It's about my own insecurities, my struggles with eating disorders. It's about my husband. Um, and yeah, just the way I think the best comedy is when it feels like it couldn't really be done by anybody else because of your perspective. So
That's
that's
interesting.
yeah,
And how
that's
much of
what
that is being, your upbringing in Kentucky is a lot of that, has to make you who you are, right?
of course.
And unique.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so what's your, I don't know if a bucket list, but what's something that you want to do with your future with comedy? Do you want to, I guess everybody wants to have a Netflix show, but where do you want to go with this? Is there some big dream?
There's a lot of big dreams. I mean, obviously, like I want comedy specials. I want as many people as possible to have access to my stand up. I want to write. I really like writing a lot, so I want to write a show sort of about growing up Jewish in Kentucky. Imagine that. Um, but yeah, I want to tour, and I want to do as much stand up as I possibly can. I love stand up a lot.
Favorite comics growing up?
Growing up, my only access to comedy, because I grew up before YouTube, was Bob and Tom radio. Was like that's what my dad and I would listen to every morning on the way to school, and I lived like half an hour away from my school. So my favorite comedians growing up were Nikki Glazer, Rodney Carrington, Mike Birbiglia, Greg Warren, and like Alonzo Bowden. Like anybody who it's a real eclectic mix, because it was just whoever was on that show a lot
Right.
was like who I was into.
So how did you make the jump to get into comedy? That's not an easy, easy move, whether it's an open mic or how did you decide? Were you in school? Were you doing performing?
I had been a music major in college for saxophone, so I had performed. Obviously very different, but I like had that little bug to be on stage. And then I had to quit because I developed some jaw problems. So and then I was graduating in 2011. So I was just like graduating into like the Great Recession, where I had no job prospects and didn't know what to do. But it was right around the time that podcasts had come out. Like that was when they were just starting. And I had a work study job in the library. So I was listening to a lot of podcasts. I guess not a lot, really, just like two, because that's all there was. But a lot of the first podcasts were by comedians, right? It was like WTF and The Nerdist. So on those podcasts, they would talk about with other comedians, it's always how did you get started?
Right.
And the common theme was everybody was like, I just went to an open mic and I started and that's it. And I was like, oh, wait, that's it? That's all you have to do? So um, I sort of like jotted down some material when I probably should have been cataloging articles for my job. And then I googled open mics, and I was living in New Orleans at the time, and there was one the next night. So I brought a couple of my roommates and gave it a shot.
Wow. And did it work out? Did you bomb? The first time is always never a good experience from what I've heard.
No, the first time I didn't bomb. The first time I did really well. The second time through like 170, yeah, I bombed. But I think that first time I just had so much blind confidence and excitement that that it went well. And I had a couple of my friends there.
Right.
But then once your friends stop coming, and once you realize, like, oh, oh, it's really just me. Once you like, it's like once the possibility enters your mind that you can bomb, it's like all you can do for a long time.
How many of those were open mic? Were those, you said 170? That wasn't all open mic, was it?
It was mostly open mics. There were a few like little book shows. New Orleans is interesting because New Orleans doesn't have a comedy club.
Hmm,
So all of the
interesting.
shows, the open mics feel like shows because you have a real audience. It's just a lot of comedians and anybody can go up. But the book shows are also just like in the backs of bars. So there's not a huge distinction between them. But after 3 years, was it 3 years? Yeah, after 3 years, I had gotten to a point where I felt like I had done all of the shows that I wanted to in New Orleans, and I could kind of get up anywhere. So I felt like it was time to leave.
Did you start in Kentucky?
No, I started in New Orleans.
Oh, is that where you were in school?
Hmm.
Oh, I see. So that was the connection there. I'm just
Yeah.
putting all, dotting all the I's and the T's and oh, so yeah, you would think that that's like a big hub for nightlife and comedy, but you're saying there really wasn't comedy there.
There was comedy. There just aren't clubs.
Oh, there's not comedy clubs.
Hmm.
I see. So
So
they
everything is
perform.
just run by comedians.
I see. So they're more what they're more in like jazz clubs.
Yeah, it's a New Orleans. New Orleans is such a unique place in every way because it doesn't operate like any other major city. And I love that about it. Um, Many people I think have tried to open comedy clubs there and it never works out.
Hmm.
Um, but the comedians there who were building that scene really did a great job of creating a community and convincing bar owners to let us have their bar basically for the night. And usually the way it would work is you would go to a bar and you would say, what's your least busy night? I can bring at least a bunch, like 12 degenerate drunk comedians if you'll let us talk into a microphone.
How so? And then how long did you? When did you move to New York?
I moved to New York, so I started stand up in 2011, and then I left New Orleans for New York in 2014.
So I guess like anybody, New York is the place you want to be, right? That's whether it's broadcasting, whether it's well, not necessarily movies, but you get the idea. I mean,
Yeah,
for finance,
I think with stand up you
entertainment.
kind of you make a decision of where do I want to put my energy. If you want to put it into, okay, I want to write for a TV show or I want to be cast in something, you go to LA. And then if you my goal was I just want to be as good at stand up as I possibly can be. And New York is the place for that. Like there's so many stages, there's so many scenes. Um, and you are amongst some of the greatest comedians who can just drop in anywhere at any time and you get to see that. It's like a real, it's just like a crash course
Hmm.
that takes 9 years.
So no overnight success, no
No, I
matter
think,
what. It's been a while. It's been brewing for a number of years. Is
yeah.
is um is the fact that with COVID these couple 3 years has that um has that changed the landscape for comics and for patrons, or are people just ready to just explode with laughter?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, when we first opened things back up, yeah, the crowds were amazing because everybody was just so grateful to be there. Um, it is interesting with these younger comics talking to them of like, how did you start? You're like, you ask somebody, how long have you been doing stand up? And they'll say 2 years. So how did you start in this? And I think for them, I mean, one great thing about COVID is there was no barrier to entry because anybody could just start a Zoom room. Um,
Right.
it's different. And to be honest, like I haven't seen enough of like younger comics to know exactly like how that's changing their style. But it'll be interesting to see sort of like the next age, like the next wave of comedy, and how they've been impacted by this.
And
Um,
it's oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't
no,
mean
that's
to
okay.
interrupt you.
That's it.
Oh no, no, I didn't. I wanted to ask you. We said about comics that you liked growing up. Who do you watch comedians now? Are you interested in seeing other comedians and how they are honing their craft?
Yeah, I have to be in the right mood. It's kind of like being at work. You don't necessarily want to watch other people work.
Yeah,
Um, but sometimes I am in the mood to just like sit and be an audience member and watch somebody and see like where they go with that premise. It's so there's nothing more exciting than being at a club and seeing somebody who for whatever reason you've just like never really seen before, just because it's a huge scene and they get up and you're like, oh my God, you're so funny. That was so good. Like it's a great feeling. I love or somebody who you saw 6 years ago and then that was it. And now you get to see them be better. Um,
right.
so and it can be great. So when I feel really stuck, and have writer's block, sometimes it's nice to watch other stand-up comedians um and just see what their process is and how they work and where they take things because it just jogs your mind. You go, I wouldn't have gone that way with it. I would have
Hmm.
gone this way. And then you're all right, well, I'll write down how I would have gone.
Do you what was I going to ask you? See, there's a clock here. We're running
Yeah.
my upgrade thing. I don't have on with comedy. There was something else I wanted to ask you, and then I lost my thought on it. It's okay. It's fine.
You can come back to it.
Um, let me see. Let me see. Favorite comedians. Talked about your future. You want to? Oh, you want to? You have some dates coming up. I know you have a lot of
Yeah.
dates throughout the area, right?
I will be for New Year's Eve weekend, so like the 29th through the 31st, I'll be in Arlington, Virginia at the Arlington Draft House. Uh, January 12th, I'll be at the Kentucky Theater in Lexington, Kentucky. Um, January 20th through the 20th and the 21st, I'll be in Austin, Texas at the Creek in the Cave. And January 26th through the 28th, I'll be at the Comedy Bar in Toronto, Canada. And yeah, that's what I got.
Great. Is it fun to go back to play at home? To play either go back to New Orleans or certainly to play Kentucky?
Yeah, it's nice. I'm always happy to have any excuse to go back home and see my parents and see my friends and just like be in a place where I can drive without GPS.
What I was going to ask you was, do you either video or audio record any of your sets? And do you like listening to yourself or watching yourself?
Oh,
Are you a tough critic on to yourself?
I hate watching myself. I hate listening to myself, but I do it. I do it. It's I like I record almost every set. I think that night in South Jersey is a great example of why comedians should record every set. Like you never know what's going to happen. Even walking in and you're like, this is going to be terrible, and it's like, all right, but it might be terrible in a great way. Um, I most of the time I will watch myself when I'm clipping up videos. We live in a digital age, so we constantly have to push out videos on Instagram and YouTube and all this stuff. And I will, as much as I hate that that's our reality, I will say it has forced me to watch myself and it has made me much better. You just notice all your little picadillos and your nervous ticks and it forces you to slow down because when
Hmm,
you're captioning yourself and you realize like, oh, I talk way too fast, I have to slow down. And a lot of times audiences appreciate that because they're not. Sometimes I think we get in our own heads because it's like, I've told this joke a million times, I just want to get it over with, I hate it, blah blah blah, this joke is stupid. And you forget like, no, your audience is hearing it for the first time. They don't know the punchline, so like slow down, give them a chance to catch up.
right.
So
It's new to them. Right. Right.
yeah, so I do watch myself, but it is
Interesting.
very
Yeah.
difficult.
Is it you said about all your, the picadillos and your insecurities. Is it a prerequisite for comedians to be shy?
No, I think comedians are, there's such a spectrum. You know, there's shy and quiet until you get on stage. I
Mhm.
think I'm probably more in that camp. And then there's also like class clown and people who love being center of attention on and off stage. Um, and the great thing about comedy is like there's room for all of us.
Right. Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for, I'm glad we had some time to have you here. This was great to speak for a few minutes.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for your very insightful, fun questions. I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and it's so enlightening, not only the comedian and a woman, but also the Jewish woman from Kentucky. Plus everything that took place, and I'm sure much more coming for you. I'm sure big
So
things are coming.
thanks. I hope so.
Ariel Elias, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Jerry.
Thank you. This is Here Now the News. We're going to have another coming very soon. So stay right here. Keep it right here. Stay tuned. We've got another episode coming soon. We'll talk to you again soon. Thanks.